just trying to, provide provide information and get the wheels turning a little bit. So I have to generalize some stuff, but if you have specific questions about how it might apply to you, feel free to shoot me an email or something. I'd be happy to chat about it. So just kind of a disclosure before we get too deep into things. All right. So I want to start by talking about college savings. And so this is nice, as you can see here in the photo, some college graduates, they're laughing, having a good time, clearly have not received their first student loan bill yet. So they don't know what's about to hit them. I joke, but a lot of people, might call it a student loan crisis. And there's just a lot of recent college graduates that have a lot of student loan debt. So people tend to want to save for their kids' college to help them out and help them avoid getting in a tough situation when they're getting started in their careers. A lot of people want to know, like, well, what is my responsibility for my kid? What should I be doing? Well, I don't really believe there's a right or wrong answer. This is one of those things that it's going to depend on your situation. What do you want to accomplish? Some people want to pay for the whole thing. Some people want to do half and half and make sure that the students have some skin in the game. So I'm not going to tell you what's right and wrong on that sense. I think that's kind of to figure out as a parent or a family, what makes the most sense for you and what you want to do. But I do think there are some things that are important no matter what, that people tend to overlook sometimes. It's just how, once your kids get a little bit older and are close to college, just discuss how much does college actually cost, and throw some numbers around there so they have an idea. And as you might know, one college may be drastically different than the other. So that may factor into, depending on how much you've saved and how much you want to provide, that might factor into the difference if they have some skin in the game too. So just have those types of conversations and let them know how much they're going to be taking out in loans. I think a lot of people get into trouble because they don't do a lot of education before the fact when they're giving out these loans. So they don't realize what they've gotten themselves into until the bill comes. So try to have those conversations beforehand. I just got a notification that said people can see my screen. Was that not the case before?
No, we can see it. We've
Okay,
seen it the whole
cool.
time.
Okay, got it. Good. And then I think another thing that often gets overlooked is college is really expensive, but that may be justified if for certain careers. I mean, it's a lot of people don't compare, okay, well, these are some things that I might want to do. How much potentially could I be making? And then compare that to how much is college going to cost. Depending on the fields you're interested in, that might sway the decision from like a public school and a private school and things that are just very different in cost. I think it's important to think about, and obviously you might switch majors or career paths a few times, but just planting that seed, I think is pretty important. And then this seems like a no-brainer, but make sure there's scholarship opportunities and financial aid opportunities are being discussed, and make sure you know what's out there, because there's a lot of stuff that can help. So it's kind of a precursor to the whole college savings discussion. Let's just assume, for the sake of this presentation, that you do want to save. There's a lot of different options out there. There's a 529 plans they're called 529 plans because that's like the government code of the legislation that created them. Very exciting, very fancy name. There's education savings accounts, custodial accounts, maybe Roth IRAs if you've read about saving that way, personal accounts. The point is, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but I like to start with the 529 plans, and I'm going to get into the details there. I think those are the most commonly used and the most beneficial for the most amount of people. So that's what I want to cover. Start there, think about if it makes sense for you, and then if not, research some of these other ones. So the 529 plan, does it make sense for you? So this is a specific type of account that you can put money into that's designed for college savings. They've actually opened it up to pay for a little bit of K through 12 as well, but predominantly it's used for secondary education costs. So why do I say start with this one and decide if it makes sense for you? Well, one, it's just the most tax efficient, which I'll get into a little bit on a future slide, but it's going to be, if you don't like paying taxes, which I don't know a lot of people who do, then this is probably going to be, the best way to avoid the most amount of taxes. And then of course, if you save and invest and it grows and the account's pretty big by the time they're going to college, you can take all the money out, spend it on college, never taxed. The key is that you have to use it on those qualified education expenses, right? So it's the tuition. It could also be room and board or off-campus rent, so long as it's where they're living for school, books, computers, supplies. So there's a lot of ways you can use it. If your kid's going to college, you will probably find a way to spend this money. And that applies to not only, typical four-year schools, public schools, private schools. It could be trade schools, community colleges, purely online schools, grad schools, schools abroad. So it's not hard to find ways to spend this money. I think one of the main thing that trips people up a little bit is, well, what if my child doesn't go to college or doesn't go the typical route? Well, there's still a lot of ways that you can spend this money. So the plans vary by state. Our plan here in Indiana, if you're an Indiana resident using that plan, you get a really nice tax benefit, but it doesn't mean you need to go to IU, Purdue, Ball State, or an Indiana school. You can use it anywhere, all the different types of schools I mentioned on the last slide. That's just purely you want to use the Indiana plan, so you get the Indiana tax break, which is basically a 20% tax credit on contributions. So if you put in $5,000, you get $1,000 back on your taxes. So like if you were getting a $1,000 refund before, and then you start doing this, you're going to get a $2,000 refund. It's almost like the state is putting in 20% of the contribution, and you're only putting in the other 80, which is a really good deal. These accounts also offer investment options. So, the money can grow a little bit. It's not just like a savings account where it just kind of maintains. You as the parent or, grandparent or whoever wants to own the account, that person controls the account. It never gets controlled by the student or the beneficiary. So even when they turn 18, 21, when they graduate, it's never controlled by them. Unless you make that decision to put it in their name, it can always be controlled by the account owner. Doesn't have a big impact on financial aid eligibility, which is nice. And there's not really common limits. So you can put a ton of money in these accounts, whereas some of the other options you're limited to smaller amounts per year. So like I was saying, though, the downside is in the most common pushback on this type of account is what if my child does not end up going to college? You could still get the money out, and all the earnings and everything, you can take that out. It's still your money. You just are going to have to pay taxes on it and a 10% penalty. So it's not a total loss, but it's definitely not the most efficient way to use the accounts. And so that there's a couple ways around that. You can use it on any of the children in the family. So if you have two accounts for your first and second child, and number one decides that's not for me, I'm gonna go start working or whatever, and you can move all that money into the account for child two. So it's flexible amongst children as long as it stays within the family. I mean, technically you could put it in the name of like a niece or a nephew or a grandchild if you're like really, really nice extended family member. Don't see that done very often, but technically you could move it around like that. A really cool thing that I've seen done a few times is that if you're putting money into this type of account and you've done a really good job saving and there's a nice balance, and then say that the child gets a full ride, that's still not maybe going to cover everything, but you might still have money left in the account when the child is graduated. So then you're thinking, well, what do I do in that scenario? I just take it out and pay the tax and penalty? Maybe. Or as that child graduates and potentially starts a family of their own, you can eventually make them the owner. And now their kids and your grandkids have a way head start on savings for colleges. So you haven't necessarily use that money to pay for your kids' school, but you've reduced a future burden for them of figuring out how to save for their own kids. So the point is, there are a lot of ways to use this money. So I think, you're probably going to end up finding a way to use it. And so that's why I say this is the best type of account, because you can invest it and it can grow and you get the tax breaks. And it just does typically tend to be most commonly used by the most amount of people. So that's where I would start. First, just determine, am I going to help, and to what extent can I or do I want to help with college? Look at the 529 plan, see if it makes sense for you. I think it will for most people. If not, investigate some of those other options. Begin saving and investing in that account. But then I think just communication is key. Once the children get a little bit older, just talk about it. Have the conversations about what you're able to cover, what's expected of them, and what are the costs, and so on. I think that's ignored a little bit too often. That pretty much wraps up this section. Let me see. I didn't see anything coming up in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop in there. Otherwise, I will just keep going. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is retirement savings. And so again, here's another nice photograph. This is what your retirement accounts might look like if you focus too much on the kids and ignore your own financial needs. Again, I joke, but I do see a lot of people who focus on the college savings, and I understand, that's coming up, and the college is super expensive, and that's the most immediate need. But college is even cheaper than retirement. I mean, and also, there's student loans aren't necessarily ideal, but they exist. So even if you're low on the college savings, the students can still go to college, right? I still don't know anyone who has found a retirement loan to get you through retirement if you haven't saved enough for yourself. So it's really just finding the right balance between saving for your future and the kids' future. But just as an example, and I mean, there's not a lot of scientific data behind these numbers, but I mean, say you might pay $100,000 for 4 years of in-state school, or double that for out-of-state school, and that's a lot of money. But not many people can retire on that amount of money. So you need to save more than that for retirement. So if you look at the numbers and the dollars, it's maybe leads to prioritizing your own savings. Again, it's just about finding that balance that works for you. But basically, the point is, don't ignore yourself, for 18 years. So let's say you've decided, okay, I am going to do some retirement savings for myself. What the heck do? I don't know how much I need to be saving. Where does it go? Where do I start? Well, there's about a million variables to consider. And again, this is just one of those parts that's going to be different for everyone. But you think about, how long do you want to work? Do you plan to work until you can't anymore, or do you want to retire early? Do you spend a lot of money, or are you pretty frugal? What type of retirement lifestyle do you want? Is it going to be similar to what you have now? Or are you going to travel the world? Do you have goals to leave behind money to your kids when you're gone? Do you have a lot of longevity in your family? Do you have parents and grandparents who live to 100? And how aggressive are you willing to invest? And so all those things kind of combine together to determine how much you need to save over the years in order to, achieve that retirement. So I'm not saying you have to find all the answers to these questions, because also that's the answers are probably going to change a few times between now and then anyways. But just giving you some food for thought, start thinking about this, and getting started is good now, because it's easier to start now and adjust course later than to just wait until you think you figure it all out and start late. That's usually not a recipe for success. Some people just really don't want to get into all that and don't want to think about it. And like I said at the beginning, I don't really like generalizing, but I will give you one rule of thumb. Try to save at least 10% of your income for retirement, and you can figure out all those details later. That's not necessarily going to be best for everyone, but I do think generally that's a pretty good goal. As you're getting started, just try to work your way up to that 10% savings number, 10% of your income going towards retirement. Again, just a generalization, but if you latch on to one thing, maybe that's it. So all that can be, obviously I've just given you like 1,000 variables. It's kind of intimidating, overwhelming, but I actually think that good savings and investing can be pretty simple, and the sooner you get started, the better. So I do want to talk about that a little bit. The sooner you get started, time more so than types of accounts or fancy investments and good, stock market and everything like that. That's great, but time is way more important than any of that. So I'm going to go through a scenario here. So say someone who starts saving doesn't save a dime for their own retirement until they are age 45. They're going to retire at age 67, which according to the Social Security office is your full normal retirement age. 22 years of savings, start at 45, end at 67. Say they make $75,000. Again, incomes vary a lot, but that's just kind of the number that I use. So say this person makes $75,000. They save that 10% every year for 22 years. They get an 8% rate of return every year. That's a pretty it's a little bit lower than a historical average for a stock portfolio, but I think that's a pretty good kind of middle of the road estimate. So what does their account look like when they're 67? They have $325,000. Another rule of thumb is that you can take 5% of your portfolio every year in retirement to spend. And so that works out to a monthly number of $1,350 for this person. Granted, they're going to have Social Security and to help, but I don't know many people that can live off of that. So what if they had started a little bit earlier? What if they started at 35? The only thing that's changed is 10 extra years of saving that 10%. And I know I have a 6% here, but it's still 8. That's a typo. So same investment returns, same savings rate, just more time. They have twice as much money as that other person and can spend more than twice as much per month from their investments. They have $680,000 instead of $320, and they can spend $2,800 a month. So let's say that they started right away at age 25. The full career of saving 10%, basically 42 years. This person is a millionaire by the time they retire. And all they had to do was just set up that 10% when they started working and let it go. That person could spend $5,500 a month. And the only reason that this is different is because of the time. So again, it may not be realistic to be 25, make $75,000 and save 10% of it right off the bat. But the point is, changing the amount of time makes a huge difference. So the best time to get started is now. So say you're convinced at this point, okay, I need to be saving, or maybe you already are. Where should I put it? Well, most people have access to something through their work, 401k, 403b, maybe something different, but it's a workplace retirement plan, right? I think usually this is a really good place to start because it's very easy. You basically just sign up, pick a savings rate, and you can kind of set it and forget it. So make it very easy and accessible to get started. You might even get a match from your employer. If so, it's essentially free money. I mean, you got to still show up to work and do a good job and stay employed, but so long as you do that, you're getting free money from the company. So make sure you take advantage of that. And then when you're investing in this type of account, there are investment options within the plan that you can choose from. You can't go out and do anything you want, but there's typically pretty good investment options for various how aggressive you want to be, how conservative you want to be. You do have some control over the investment options there. They're intended for retirement. So this is not the savings account that you want to build up money in if you're trying to buy a car in a few years. You can't take the money out till you're age 59 and a half or later without paying a penalty. Don't ask me why it's 59 and a half. I don't know why they would do that. It seems like it'd be easier if they made it just 60, but who knows? But again, it's got to be money that you're willing to part with for a long time. And there are tax benefits too, which I will get into on a future slide. But you're either going to get tax savings now or tax savings in the future at some point if you do it this way. So if you want to save a little bit more, or maybe you don't have anything available to you through work, you can have personal retirement accounts that aren't tied to your workplace. These are good too. There's just a few drawbacks. Like you can't put as much money in. There's more limits on the amount of money you can put in compared to the workplace plans. But you do have more control over the investments and the same tax benefits. So these are good too. I would probably, for most folks, start by looking at that workplace plan, seeing what's available, make sure you're getting that match. Once you're doing that, then investigate some of these other types of accounts. And then you also have the non-retirement accounts. So this could be, like just a general investment account or a brokerage account or something like that, where there's not the tax benefits, there's not the age restrictions, it's not tied to your work, there's no limits. It's just a straight up investment account. So there's less benefits, there's more flexibility. Usually it makes sense to focus on the plans with tax benefits first, and then go to those accounts. But again, in certain situations, it might make sense to investigate the non-retirement accounts. So this is the tax benefits I wanted to talk about. Whether you're doing the 401k or the 403b, or you just have your personal IRA, which stands for individual retirement account, you probably, depends on your work, but in a lot of cases, you're going to have a choice between traditional and Roth, also known as pre-tax versus after-tax. So traditional savings, and I think of these things as just two different buckets where you can put money into under the same umbrella that is like your 401k, for example. There's two buckets in there. One is the traditional bucket where the money goes, it's pre-tax. The money goes into the account, it is not taxed. So like say your paycheck was $100, you're saving 10%, $10 goes into that account, you're taxed on the remaining 90. So you're paying less tax today. In the future, so you can invest it and it grows and becomes that nice big, the nice big nest egg that I showed you a few slides ago. Well, you got to pay taxes. Uncle Sam comes calling eventually, right? So when you take the money out, since you did not pay tax on the front end, you pay tax on the back end. So it essentially just kind of replaces your paycheck. Taxes come out of that, taxes come out of this bucket when you take it out in retirement. So who would use this? Somebody who values getting a tax break right now, someone in a high tax bracket, someone who makes a lot of money, someone who expects to be in a lower tax bracket in the future. Basically anyone who wants to pay less taxes right now. What about the other bucket? What about the Roth? It's basically the exact opposite. It's the after-tax portion. So your money gets taxed up front and then goes into the account. So in that $100 paycheck example, you pay tax on the full $100, and then the $10 gets put into the account. So the downside is, does not lower your taxes at all today. However, since you've already paid tax on those dollars, you can invest it, let it grow, build up that nice nest egg. You're never taxed on that money again. So even on the growth, so you could have a big account that's all tax-free when you pull it out in the future. So who does this make sense for? People that don't make as much money today, people in lower tax brackets, people that do not mind paying taxes today, and maybe you think you're going to eventually make more money or spend more money in retirement. You're going to be in a higher tax bracket down the road as opposed to where you are right now. Or people who have a really long timeline to build up even more growth because it's all tax-free. So what a lot of times what you typically see is like younger folks earlier on in their careers choosing the Roth option, and as they get raises or maybe get married and they have joint incomes that puts them in a higher tax bracket, maybe they eventually switch to doing the traditional because they want the tax break today. So you're never locked into one or the other. And this is a little bit more of an advanced topic, but just know that there's a few different ways you can do this. And depending on your situation, it might make a lot of sense to do one instead of the other. So what type of account are you using? Is it pre-tax or after tax? How much should you save? We kind of talked about that. I haven't talked at all about the actual investments yet. That could be a whole seminar on its own. But I do have just a couple general thoughts on this. The stock market can be kind of overwhelming, a little scary if you've never invested before. It's a bit of a roller coaster, but I do think it's a great place to start for most people. The younger you are, the longer you have until you're going to use this money, you can afford to take more risks because you don't need the money for a long time. So you're probably more willing to ride that roller coaster, knowing that ultimately it is going up. It's just a bumpy ride along the way. This is especially true in those retirement accounts where you can't actually get to the money until you're 59 and a half without paying a penalty. So you're probably not going to touch it for many years. It really makes sense to start more aggressive in those because you're not, there's no way you're going to touch it anyways. I'm not saying you need to become a stock market expert, but if you've got these types of plans or accounts, or you want to get started, just at least from a surface level, try to understand how you are invested. Am I invested aggressively, conservatively? Is it mostly in stocks? Is it in bonds, cash? If you have a representative that comes out and visits your workplace, or if you have an advisor, and just ask and have them explain it to you if they haven't already. If you have questions, obviously my contact information is out there. I'd be happy to talk through it with you, but I think it's just kind of nice to know how you're invested in general. I also think that trying to outperform the market or make a lot of changes, trying to time based on what you think is going to happen in the future is essentially impossible to do on a regular basis. So even if you're right every now and then, you're also going to be wrong a lot, and it's time consuming, it's expensive, and it just doesn't really work out that well. So you can really invest in the entire stock market for very low cost and just kind of set it and forget it and let that work, let the growth work for you over time. There will be bad months and weeks and years, but over time, the recovery has always happened. The general trend of the stock market is up. So if you're willing to kind of ride the ride, you're gonna do pretty well. Just be wary of costs too. Like if you're investing in some sort of investment, there's probably cost tied to it. High costs eat away at returns. I personally believe that you can pretty much build any type of investment you want and keep it really low cost. And if you're working with some advisor, doesn't hurt to ask how they're getting paid or how much they're making. It's nice to know, there's probably money going to them. You are probably paying them. So it doesn't hurt to ask the question. So I talked a lot about these different accounts and how to invest it. There's so much more to personal finance, as you all know, than just retirement and college savings and investing. Here's a list of all kinds of different things that might come into play for you. Obviously, college, taxes, cash flow, debt, new jobs, maybe you own a business, your company benefits, insurance, estate planning. And here, you can read the list, but there's there's a million different areas. And I kind of believe that all of those things need to play together to really maximize your potential and create a good, create a good outlook for you. So, like for example, you can be saving a lot of money, but if you don't have appropriate insurance coverage and something bad happens, it might all be for naught because you didn't accumulate enough and then didn't leave anything behind for your family. So they all need to be working together. Point is, if you have a lot of this on your plate, just talk to somebody, whether it's an advisor or financial wellness person through your work, or if you know a friend who works with this kind of thing. I mean, really anybody. Just it's nice to have someone to talk to about it, maybe get a free consultation. I'm not saying you have to like pay somebody to handle all this for you. If you have a lot of complexity, you certainly can, but you don't have to do this on your own, is my point. But there are a couple, so I obviously can't get in, we don't have enough time for me to go over all of this stuff right now, but I did want to hit on a couple that I think people might have asked about during the sign up process. The first one is life insurance. I mean, if you're here as a parent of a child, you probably need some coverage. So, you know, it's going to be different for everybody in terms of how much you need, but, you know, think about what you want to be covered for your family if you are gone. So you know, your family no longer has your income. Would there be budgeting concerns for them? You know, can they still pay the bills? Can they still pay the car? Things like that. You may need to have some insurance coverage for replacing your income. It might make sense to have coverage in place to pay off the mortgage. That could be a really nice way to either lower the monthly costs that your family has to deal with after the fact, or maybe then they eventually go to sell the house and they can get the full profit from it. You know, think about if you have a significant amount of debt, maybe you have insurance coverage that can wipe that out if something happens to you. The biggest future cost other than retirement is college savings, right? If you were planning on helping your kids out with school, maybe you need to have some life insurance coverage to at least get them started with college. And then there's a few other reasons, you know, cover a funeral and final expenses. If you want to leave behind inheritance, if you want to leave some money to charity, if there's any tax concerns if you have if you have a high net worth and you have some concerns about owing taxes on that, have insurance so that the insurance pays that, not your family. So there's a lot of reasons, but you think about what of those things is important to you. You can kind of add up, well, you know, I think I would like to at least give them a few years worth of my income and pay off the house. And so maybe it's this is what I want to have. It's going to be different for everybody, but I also wanted to touch on, there's really two main types of life insurance, term and whole life. Term is a specified period of coverage. So usually it's going to be like 10, 20, or probably 30 years worth of coverage. And then after that period, you don't have the coverage anymore. Whole life covers you so long as you are paying for it forever. So obviously that sounds great. It's also a lot more expensive. I usually like to tell people, again, could vary a lot depending on your situation. I usually like to start with term. Term is significantly cheaper. And if you think through a lot of those reasons I just went over, say you get a 20 or 30-year term policy and you make it to the end of that policy and you don't have insurance anymore. Do you really need this much insurance anymore? I mean, maybe you have the house paid off, maybe the kids have already went to college, you know, maybe you're close to retirement and income isn't really what you're focusing on anymore. You've got the retirement account. So because it's so much cheaper and because of if you might not need insurance in the future, I like to start by seeing if term insurance makes sense. Not to say a whole life is bad. It's certainly fine. It's just a lot more expensive. So that's kind of how I think about it. But, you know, if you have a whole life policy, I'm not saying you've made a bad decision or anything. It might make sense for you. But I know that was something that people had questions about, I think, in the sign up. So feel free to type something if I didn't address the question. The other thing that was brought up was guardianship. I kind of wanted to take a step back and talk about just general estate planning. That sounds like a fancy term. It's like, oh, I don't really have, you know, maybe you thinking I don't really have an estate to speak of. I just have some stuff and some accounts. But I think everyone should have basic documents in place. Look, this is not a fun topic to think about and address, you know, our own mortality, but for that reason, it's often overlooked and people push it off and ignore it. But there's a lot of good reasons to do this. All right. So number one, obviously, with these documents, which I'll go through some key documents on the next slide, but you name a guardian for your kids. Sometimes that's a very straightforward answer that, so basically, if you don't have these documents in place, things go through the courts, the probate courts, and other people decide what happens to your family and your stuff. Sometimes that's really straightforward and everything works out great. Not always. So if you have a document that says exactly what is supposed to happen, that's really the only way you can guarantee that that will actually happen. Having those documents just really makes things easier for your loved ones that are left behind. They know exactly what they're supposed to do, who gets what, where things go. Just makes things a lot easier, makes things a lot faster. And again, if you don't have that in place, some court is going to determine what happens. It takes a long time. It can be messy. It can be public, and it may not be what you thought or wanted to happen. It's just hard on everybody. So I would have the basic documents in place if you can. I have not actually used, you can do these online, like LegalZoom, and there's some places online. I have not actually used those. They seem to be relatively valid. I would probably recommend you talk to an actual attorney. But again, I can't, speak to that I've done due diligence for those sites, but you can do it online for really cheap. But you can also find an actual attorney that can do it for relatively cheap as well. So what do you need to have in place and why? Most people have heard of a will. This is basically says if you have a bunch of stuff, who gets it? So it can be very, my spouse gets everything, or you can list out certain assets that go to certain people. But perhaps even more important than that is that you can have a clause in there that establishes the guardian for your minor children. So if your children are still young, you can determine who gets custody and who has guardianship for the kids. That's probably the best reason to do it, bar none. Also, there's a healthcare power of attorney with a HIPAA release. So I don't know, maybe some of you would unfortunately have been through this or heard about this, but it can be really hard if someone's in the hospital. It can be really hard to help them. Healthcare professionals have to abide by certain rules, and if there's not a signed legal document to show them that, hey, I can have access to make some decisions here and have access to the records and stuff, they can't really let you do any of that. So it's really important to, who do you want to help you or make decisions on your behalf in terms of your health care if you are sick or hurt and cannot do it. Or even just having access to the information can be a pain sometimes. So this makes that really easy. Living will, that is, if you are for some reason on life support, you can decide in advance, what do you want to happen? Do you want them to try to keep you alive? Do you want them to not? It's up to you. You can decide that in advance, and that takes a really, really hard decision off the plate of your loved ones. And then financial power of attorney. So it's basically like healthcare power of attorney, except for your money, bank accounts, investment accounts, things like that. If you're in the hospital for an extended period of time, unable to do these things, the bill's still got to get paid. People might need to take money out of your bank accounts or your investment accounts to do that and just keep your finances afloat. So by naming this type of, having this document and naming someone, they're able to do that for you. Again, it just makes things a lot easier. Then the other thing, and this is totally free, and you don't have to talk to an attorney. You just have to fill out a form. If you have retirement accounts or investment accounts, list a beneficiary. You can do that through, wherever the account lives, or if it's through work, talk to your HR people. Not only is it super easy, but it supersedes anything in a legal document. So if your will says, hey, my kids get everything, but your retirement account lists your spouse as beneficiary, that account's going to your spouse, and then the kids get everything else. So name your beneficiaries. It's powerful, it's easy, and it's just kind of low-hanging fruit to make sure that's taken care of. Okay, so the last thing, and I'll go through this briefly because I know it's been 45 minutes already. You're probably tired of hearing me talk at you. One of the other things that was mentioned is just how do we help kids build good money habits? How do we impart some wisdom on them? I do believe a lot of the money habits we have as adults are determined by how we grow up. I've seen that go two ways. I've seen, some people have the exact same habits as their parents, and some have the exact opposite. But I do think it makes a difference. So I'll preface this by saying I'm not in the business of telling other people how to be parents. I don't think that's really good business. So what I did is I just went out and talked to some people about what they do and some things that have worked for them, and just some examples that I was given. So if you're giving kids allowances, tie that to chores somehow, so that kind of teaches working and earning based on the work you do, or, providing some type of service for pay, essentially. So, you can either say, okay, you get your allowance once you complete these chores, or you can say, well, for this chore, you get this much, for this chore, you get this much, so on and so forth. Obviously, however you want, but that was one example. One person said that they make sure that their kids know the importance of shopping around, or, checking different prices for things. To, beware of impulse buying was a common piece of advice. I really like this next one. Give every dollar a job, right? So if you're giving your kids an allowance, or they earn money through mowing lawns or something like that, help them understand the importance of not necessarily spending every dollar, right? Have goals for spending, sure, but also saving, or maybe giving. Maybe your kids really like animals and they want to give a few bucks to the Humane Society. Help them understand the importance of every dollar has a job. The person in this specific example said they took like $100 in $1 bills and just put it out on their table, and had their kids sitting there, and they said, okay, here's $100. Like, this might be how much money you make, but then we have to pay taxes. So let's set aside this amount of dollars. And okay, so then we have to pay these bills and these bills and these bills. Let's set aside these many dollars. And then, I want to give a little bit back, so I'm going to give this dollar to charity. And then you end up with, a small portion, as we all know, because we go through this all the time. We end up with a much smaller portion of our earnings than what our paycheck says, right, to spend. And so that, this person specifically said that actually really seemed to resonate. Like, oh, we actually, not all of this money is for spending on what I want. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Another thing that a lot of people have said is if they're saving up for something, and the child is trying to save up, whether it be for a purchase or for like just putting money into savings, match it, kind of like what your work might be doing for you, to help them out a little bit, and encourage them to save more. So one person said if they wanted to make it, and I think these kids were a little bit older, maybe like middle school or something, but if the kids want a big purchase, have them pitch it, like almost like a presentation, like they might do at school. Like, oh, you guys want a trampoline? Okay, why? How would you use it? Why do you think it's a good idea? How much does it cost? And just have them pitch it, and then talk about how you pay it. Maybe they pitch in a little bit, or maybe it's just if they do the work for the pitch, they get it, something like that. But just helps them think about the cost and the use and things like that. If you are saving money for them, so kind of like I talked about in the college savings portion, discuss it eventually. I'm not saying you need to tell your kids that they have several $1,000s sitting there that they can use for something, but I think as they get older, especially with the college, it's important that they know what they have and what you've done for them and what they're supposed to use it for and things like that. Try to help them understand debt, especially again, if they're getting older, making their own money, getting close to college. They have a debit card. Maybe you even experiment with the credit cards, but try to help them understand that it's not like free money. Student loans, help them understand what they're getting into, and how long it might take to pay all this stuff off, and what happens if you don't, and how interest accumulates and things like that. And then one thing that I've really thought was interesting is that just having frank conversations, like, again, and this is probably when the kids are a bit older, but here's what I did that worked really well. And now I have the, now I have a great, now I can retire because I was a good saver when I was 25. Or, well, looking back on it, I wish I would have done this. If I would have done this when I was your age, I wouldn't still be working, or things like that. Eventually, you have experiences, so try to teach the kids about those. So that is what some people shared. I thought those things were pretty interesting. I think it kind of boils down to just be open to having some of these conversations about money. A lot of times money can be kind of taboo, and people don't like to talk about it. And I'm not telling you how much to share and how much to keep private with your kids, but I think just having discussions around money can really help kids start to think about it a little bit differently, or even just think about it in the first place. So that seems to be pretty helpful for folks. So in summary, here's what we cover. Savings for college. I would just say have a plan, figure out what you think you want to do, and then eventually discuss it with the children. Retirement savings, I know it can be overwhelming, but I think it doesn't have to be really hard. And then again, don't forget, time is your biggest benefit there. The estate documents, if nothing else, just try to get those in place for the sake of your loved ones, make it easier on them. And then just, like I just said, for trying to teach kids, just try to play an active role, have open conversations about it, and make it a conversation, and don't just ignore it. All right, so that's all I had. Definitely happy to take questions on any of that. Sorry, I know it was a lot. I feel like I just talked at you for an hour. So apologies on that front, but I can share these slides. I'm happy to answer phone calls and emails too. If something comes up, feel free to reach out. But yeah, happy to take some questions now if there are any.
If you have a question, you can just unmute yourself, or feel free to put it in the chat as well. Does anybody else have any ideas for how they talk with their children about money, or anything that Josh hadn't mentioned? I know I found that part really helpful.
I have a book I love that's called The Opposite of Spoiled. It is my favorite money for kids book.
I'm not familiar with that, but I'm writing it down. Thank you, Abby.
Oh, looks like someone, yeah, where can we find info about the 529 plan uses? So actually back on an earlier slide, and I can pass this out afterwards, but so the Indiana plan has a website where you can go and see all that. It's collegechoicedirect.com, which I can send that around too, but they have pretty good educational materials, and all the information about what it can be used for and how you can invest it and things like that. They also make it super easy to sign up and open an account. You can have that open and funded directly from your bank in like 10 minutes. So it's collegechoicedirect.com.
That's good. Are there any other questions or feedback for what you do with your kiddos that works well? See, Linda says thank you, and Mike, and I know I've gotten some texts, Josh, as well, that people are enjoying it and finding it useful. Okay. I'll give
Good.
a couple more seconds if you want to submit a question.
And again, I know I just said this too, but I really don't mind answering questions after the fact. So feel free to shoot me an email or something.
I see you have one from Teddy. It says not discussed during the presentation, but can you speak a little bit to dependent care FSAs, what they are, tax benefits, and if how they can be used to pay for preschool costs.
Okay, yeah, I see that. So let's see. Can you speak a little bit of dependent care sites? What are they tax benefits? Yeah. So my understanding on these is so it's kind of similar to the health savings accounts that have to be, maybe you have that through work where you have to use it on healthcare purposes. These are similar where it's money, but you have to use it on dependent care expenses. And so I'm not super familiar with these, but I believe what the tax benefit is that it's money that can be, you get a tax break if you're using these accounts and using them to pay for dependent care. So if you have access to that through work or something, and you have those costs, it's probably a good idea to use that. I actually don't know if they can be used for preschool costs. I would have to look into that a little bit, but so I can follow up with that answer. But typically those do have good tax benefits, and it could save you money on taxes so long as you're going to use it for the qualified expenses. Kind of like the 529s are for college. Those are accounts for, dependent care with tax benefits. Typically good idea to use those if you're going to spend the money on those things.
Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you for your time and all your preparation. I think it was really helpful, and we're grateful for that. And also thank you to all of you for coming tonight.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I was happy to get the opportunity. I'm hopefully everyone found it helpful.
Absolutely. So I'll share the recording if you want to share this with anyone who wasn't able to attend, as well as Josh's contact info again. And then I think, Josh, you mentioned that we'll have access to your presentation as well.
Yeah, I can just email you the final presentation as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, I see a different message. All right. And I think that'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.